May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is son of Yisrayl Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is son of Yisrayl Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's a privilege and honor to present to you the sons and daughters of Yisrayl now entering the sanctuary. I now present one of the sons of Yisrayl, Deacon Yahweh Hawkins.
All right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Now, what I want to talk about today is Yahweh's Passover, the faith. In the book of Yada, verses 1 through 3, we can clearly see how we must contend for the faith. The original faith that was once delivered to the saints. Now, what we want to know is, how was this faith delivered to the saints? Now, through the history of mankind, Yahweh has provided us with teachers. Through the history of mankind, Yahweh has provided us with people who was prophesied to teach us and to teach the people, to show us how to receive Yahweh's protection. Now, and when we study the scriptures, you can see that each of those teachers taught the same thing one after another. And they were teaching what? They were teaching the laws and the prophecies. Now, a teacher is one who provides us with knowledge, who provides us with knowledge, one who teaches us. Now, the knowledge of Yahweh is one of the most precious things on earth. And Pastor said that he doesn't care what you try to compare it with. Knowledge is one of the most precious things that we can have. And for one to reject this knowledge is the essence of foolishness and is total idiocy. Now, if we look at the world today, the shape that the world is in and the problems that the world is having, that's because they rejected the knowledge that came from the one who Yahweh has sent, or sent in that time period or in those days. Now, in this time period, we also have a teacher. And to find out who that teacher is in this time period, let's turn over to Acts 7, verse 37. It's on page 847. Acts 7:37. And it says, so we're looking at who this teacher was or is that Yahweh has sent us in these last days. And it says, this is that Moshe. Now, what was Moshe teaching in his time period? Moshe was teaching the laws and the prophecies. He was teaching the 10 Commandments in his time period. Now, it says, this is that Moshe. Remember, we're trying to figure out who that teacher is in this time period. So it says, this is that Moshe. So, who is that Moshe in this time period? Right, Yisrayl Hawkins is that Moshe in this time period. And it says, who said to the children of Israel, Yahweh your father will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers, him you will hear. And what will we hear from this prophet in his last days? What do we hear from him? Okay, let's go over to Acts 3:19 to find out what we hear from this prophet in these last days. Acts 3:19, it's on page 842. So this is what we hear from this prophet or this teacher in these last days. This is what we hear from him. It says, repent therefore and be converted, that your sins may be blotted out, that time of refreshing may come from the presence of Yahweh. And it says that your sins may be blotted out. We all know what sin is, right? Sin is the breaking of Yahweh's laws, the breaking of Yahweh's 10 Commandments that Moshe taught. Now, Pastor Yisrayl Hawkins, he's also teaching Yahweh's 10 Commandments in these last days. And he's teaching us Yahweh's laws and the way that we should guard ourselves. And he's teaching us how to receive Yahweh's protection. Now, so there is no way we can receive the Passover of Yahweh are the protection of Yahweh, without our sins being blotted out. But our sins can't possibly be blotted out by just hearing. Let's turn over to Romans 2:12. Romans 2:12 on page 874. And it says, so this is what we have to do for our sins to be blotted out. It says, for as many as have sinned without the law will also perish. And perish, that doesn't sound like protection to me. Does it sound like protection to any of you? All right, so protection is not perishing. Now, without the law, and as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. Now, for not the hearers of the law, so this is what we have to do. It says, for not the hearers of the law are the righteous in the sight of Yahweh. Remember, we're on the sea of glass. Yahweh is watching everything that we do. So it says, for not the hearers of the law are the righteous in the sight of Yahweh, but the doers. We have to be doers of the law. When we learn from our teacher, Yisrayl Hawkins, the one that Yahweh has sent in these last days, when we learn and get the knowledge and we learn how to receive Yahweh's protection, we need to put these things to use. We need to be doers of the law. So I'm going to read that one more time for you. For not the hearers of the law are the righteous in the sight of Yahweh, but the doers of the law are the righteous. And we need to remember that Passover is coming up, the Feast of Passover, and unleavened bread. Now, leavening rises, right? And also the gods like to rise themselves above others. They like to rise themselves up above their brothers and sisters. We need to make sure we get the gods out and get the sin and the leavening out. And with that, if y'all please stand.
At this time, it's my privilege and honor to present to you, son of Yisrayl, Deacon Yisrayl Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Now today, I'll be speaking about this great gathering that we heard about for the past few weeks here now, and how some of these news articles tie into this great gathering. Okay, now first I want to show you this here. You see, U.S. launches missiles into Syria in response to chemical weapons attack. Now at the bottom here you can see the U.S. missiles hit at 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:45 a.m. Friday morning in Syria. Okay, notice this is the time in Syria, 3:45 a.m. Now, 3:45 here in Strong's, 3:45, it's the same as 3:44. Here you have 3:44, it means a screamer. Okay, a hawk, kite, or vulture. Okay, it's from 3:37, it means a hawk, a falcon, a kite. It goes to 3:37, it's from 188, which means alas, or woe. Okay, you see here, alas, woe. Here's 188. It says, in the sense of crying out after. Woe, alas, you see, in the sense of crying out after. Okay, now, a hawk, you know, a hawk, it cries out. Okay, now, here you see, here was another article that came out yesterday. It says, Trump cranks up war machine, 59 missiles strike Syria, war hawks celebrate. Okay, notice that war hawks right there. Okay, now here's one war hawk. Here you have Democratic Senator Shaheen introduces bill to investigate RT News. Okay, now they put out a bill. Here you have the U.S. Senate bill targets RT and Sputnik as propaganda. Okay, now these articles were going against RT News. Okay, here's the bill itself. Here you have 625. Get that number right there, 625. Foreign Agents Registration, Modernization, and Enforcement Act. Okay, now this bill here, if you notice the number, it was bill number 625. And 625 in the Hebrew means a gathering. A gathering. Okay, it comes from Hebrew 622, which means to gather, gathered. It also means all together, brought together, gather, and gathering. Okay, now we know of two gatherings that are going on at this time. There's the gathering in Yahweh's house here at Abel, and then there's also a gathering for destruction. And this is what the Greek shows. Greek 625, remember that was the Senate bill, number 625. It means Apollos. Okay, it comes from Greek 624, which is the name of the Greek god Apollo. Here's Greek 622. It means to destroy. Okay, destroy, utterly destroy. It also means violently, completely perish, and absolute destruction. Okay, it also means to destroy utterly. It says to destroy, to put out of the way entirely, abolish, put an end to, and ruin. Okay, so there's the gathering that's going on in the world. Okay, there's the gathering, and that's for destruction. That's Satan's work. Satan is doing this gathering for destruction. Okay, now here was the senator's name, Shaheen. Okay, it says Shaheen. It says is a name of a Persian origin, referring specifically to, you see here it's utilized for falconry. Okay, it also says the name has been used in the English language to describe the Shaheen falcon. Okay, now notice that there's another hawk. Okay, the Shaheen falcon. Okay, now here was another article. It says Donald Trump warned he is one step away from military clashes with Russia after Syria blitz. Okay, now if you notice the time there, the time is 2200. Okay, the 7th of April 2017. Okay, you see the 2200. Alright. Now here's 2200 in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it means to cry, to call. It's corresponding to this word. It means to make an outcry, to cry. Okay, it goes to this number here, 2199, which means to cry out, to call. Okay, now you see here, assembled, assembled together, called. It means called together, cried, cries, cry aloud, crying aloud, and shouting. It also means to cry out, to call. Okay. Now here you have, this is also the meaning from the same word, number 2200. It means to shriek. Okay, from anguish or danger. As a herald, okay, which means messenger. It says to announce or to convene publicly, assemble, call together, to make a cry out, gather together, and cause to be proclaimed. Okay, so you see here, to shriek. Notice that word, to shriek. Okay, now if you go to Revelation 18:2, Revelation 18:2, this is the word to shriek, as we'll get into later. Revelation 18:2, found on page 982. It says, "And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of demons, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird." Now you see there, at the beginning of the verse. He cried mightily. Okay, now this is from the interlinear, Revelation 18:2, and you see cried is from 28:96. Okay, so now 28:96 means to scream, to cry out. I cry aloud, to shriek, and then you have shriek. Then it says properly of a raven, of the raven. Okay, and you see to scream, to cry out. Now, I have a short video here. You can see, first it shows a hawk. What a hawk does, it's crying out, and then you see a raven. Okay, so if I can play the video. Alright, so there you have two animals. The hawk, as you saw, the first one was a hawk, and then you have a raven or a crow. Now, also in this word, 28:96, it means cries, cry, crying, screaming, screams, shout, shouted, shouting. Okay, it means of the cry of a raven, hence universally to cry out, cry aloud, call out, and speak with a loud voice. Okay? Also you have to croak as a raven or scream. You have to call aloud, shriek, exclaim, entreat, and cry out. Now, who is crying out? Okay, well, let's go to Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58, found on page 566. Isaiah 58 verse 1, it says, to cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions, and the house of Jacob their sins. You see there, cry aloud. Okay, well, here is the true hawk. Okay? Praise Yahweh. Now, the Hawkins there, not only is that the hotel where we should abide, as it says in Psalms 91, but this is the true Hawkins here, okay, that we need to look for. Okay, it says, it will come to pass in the last days that the mountain promotion of the house of Yahweh will be established in the chief of the nations. It will be raised above all congregations, and all nations will eventually flow to it. Okay, now it will be exalted, all right, which we'll learn about later. Now, let's go to Matthew. Turn to Matthew. This is talking about that same hawk, the Hawkins. Matthew 3, and let's look at verse 3 found on page 729. Matthew 3 verse 3, it says, for this is he who was spoken of by the prophet Isaiah, saying, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of Yahweh, make straight the highway for our Father. Okay, now verse 4 says, this Yachanan, Yahweh is merciful, wore a tallit of rough linen, and he was zealous for the law of Yahweh, because he was trained to be a teacher, namely of the law of Yahweh. Okay, so this is the hawk, the Hawkins. Okay, he's zealous for the word of Yahweh. And you can see this hawk here, Yisrayl Hawkins, he is zealous for the word of Yahweh. Okay, praise Yahweh. Alright, and as we read there, Isaiah 2, let's go to Isaiah 2 verse 3. Found on page 531. Isaiah 2:3, it says, and many people will go and say, come, let us go to the mountain of Yahweh, to to the house of the father of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths, for the law will depart from Zion, and the word of Yahweh will depart from Jerusalem. Okay, so this is what Pastor is telling us, to come to the house of Yahweh. Okay, this is what the numbers are showing, the gathering to the house of Yahweh. Okay, this is where we shall abide, as it says in Psalms 91. Now that's all the time I have. If you all please stand. I'll turn it over to the great Deacon Michael Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, saints of Yahweh, you may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We're going to go a little quickly here. The title of my speech today is Yahweh's Greatest Gathering on a Single Hill. On a single hill. I'd like to start off reading from a future book of Yisrayl, the last days book of Psalms. And in this chapter, it's going to be titled, Yahweh willing, The Greatest Gathering. Yahweh said it clearly in chapter 23. Behold, the day is come, says our Father, great Yahweh. Now, Yahweh said it clearly in chapter 23 that the day is come. Shortly after this was the song was finished and the song had been sung, then we see all the stuff taking place in Syria. Okay, so Yisrayl Hawkins, the great overseer of the house of Yahweh, had commissioned the men and women sound room to work on this song and get it ready for the feast. And we were doing all the recordings, getting ready for the songs he needed to be finished, and one of the priests had come up to do a final recording on the song, Who's Like Yahweh? Well, he came up on 4:3:17. He came up to record the last recording for Who's Like Yahweh on 4:3:17. Well, the number 4:3:17 means Who's Like Yahweh. So all these numbers add up. They all point to Yahweh's in full control of this house. So we were talking about these numbers, and the word hill had been coming into my mind for some time, and I'd been wanting to look into the elevations of where the sanctuary sits. Now, it gives you a different elevation for Clyden, and usually it's where the county seat is where they give you the elevation. I wanted to find out the elevation right here. So I pulled up an app that gave us the exact elevation. Okay, so what it is the elevation where we are is 2,023 feet. Okay, 2,023 comes from 2022, and let's look at these numbers. 2022 in the Hebrew means, are you ready for this? It means hill. Hill country, mount, mountain, and get this, mountain to explain. All right? And it gets better than this. All in the elevation of right where you are sitting right now. This means hill. The greatest hill, the single hill where only is the mountain, where we have the mountain to explain the laws and prophecies through Yisrayl Hawkins, Yahweh's last day's witness, and the great priests and priestesses of the house of Yahweh. Now it gets better. 2023 from the Greek means to supply, provide, minister unto, lavishly furnish, and the best, and I love this part, to richly supply everything needed for an ancient chorus to be a grand production, to accomplish a grand objective. All this in the elevation of where we are at right now, 2,023 feet. Now this song is all of Pastor's songs are just incredible. They're wonderful, but there's something incredibly special about this song, because when the song was finished and it was approved, then all the trouble hit in Syria, and what's going on in the world is beginning to escalate greatly. So one thing I wanted to point out is the song is about the greatest gathering. It's about bringing the people home. And we see refugees from all over the world searching for a place of peace. We know that this is the place of peace. This is the place they're searching for. So I wanted to show you something. This is our refugee camp. All right? And we have some signs up. And you have the tents there, and you can see the house of Yahweh in the background. But like all the other refugee camps in the world, this refugee camp is closed. They closed them all off for the refugees and the migrants in other countries and are kicking them out and doing horrible things to these poor people that just want peace and want a place of safety, which they can only find here at Abel, at the house of Yahweh. But the house of Yahweh is open to all people. It's open to all the refugees. It's open to anyone that wants to come and have true peace. And the last one, the house of Yahweh will never close. Now, finally, I wanted to talk about this very special song CD that the men and women's music departments worked on. There's 18 songs. It's usually a song tape opening, pastor's song, and then 8 men, 8 women songs. And then we put it together as a family CD. Okay, well, so I looked up the numbers 18, and it's 76 minutes long. The word 1876 in the Hebrew means to spring up, to sprout, and to bring forth. As it says in Isaiah, they will spring up among the grass as willows by the watercourse, here at the house of Yahweh. Now, in the Greek, 1876 means necessary essentials. So it is true, the song CDs are necessary essentials to complement and to go along with the book of Yahweh, the books of Yisrael, all of the House of Yahweh publications. There's strength to the upright. There's strength to those who trust in Yahweh. And this song CD is incredibly beautiful. And I think you're all going to love it. Now we're going to be singing Pastor's new song, The Greatest Gathering, at Seder. So it will be made available for those who want a copy to learn it. It's a beautiful song. It's really easy to learn. And I think you're all really going to enjoy it as much as myself and the great overseer and the men and women who worked on it do. With that, I have the great honor to turn it over as a deacon from Nebraska to the great priest from Alaska. You all stand. One of the great priests in the house of Yahweh, the great Kohan Benjamin Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, great saints of Yahweh. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You may be seated. Okay. The greatest gathering taking place right now. In fact, I got some news releases last night. There was about 3 of them that came over my email from Yahweh's branch about this great gathering that's taking place at this time at the great house of Yahweh. Now this morning, continuing along this theme, if you all notice this morning and on CNN, it's telling us that Russia is flexing its muscle. Okay, they're sending a warship over to where the 2 ships are that shot off those missiles, those 59 missiles. Okay, all right. Thank you. Okay, so if you'll notice the number on this boat, let's start there. That's very interesting. 745 in the Hebrew, it's this word here, aria, and it's from this word here, which means lion, as you can see, lion or lions. And it's from this word ara, and it's this word here, 717, which means gathered. Now we've seen that number come up many, many times, have we not? 717, gathered or to pluck. You know, think about treading the grapes of wrath, okay, that Pastor talked about a couple years ago. You know, we're treading the grapes of wrath. We're opposing Babylon. Now, this attack on this base, it was in a place called Homs, Syria. Okay? So, if we look at the gematria of Homs, Syria, it's 758. And I noticed they even had somebody had looked it up before, and it means above, and 758 also means above, which is interesting. But it's 758, Ham, Syria, and it means just that. It means Aram or Syria. It means a grandson of Nahor and of an Israelite, Aram, Mesopotamia, Syria, Syrians. Okay? That's what this number means in the Jewish gematria. But notice what it means. It means exalted. Exalted. Okay? And keep that in your mind, because this is the beginning of the exaltation of Yahweh. The great house of Yahweh is going to be exalted and lifted up for all the world to see. Now turn over to Genesis 7:17. 7:17. Genesis 7:17, coincidentally, talking about the flood in Noah's day. And think about where, Yahshua said it will be like the days of Noah. Okay? 7:17 says, "Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark." Now that word lifted up there, it's the same, it's the word number 7311, which you're going to hear about in a few minutes. And it means to exalt. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. Now, think, put scriptures together on that, okay? Don't think like the world does, with a carnal mind, but, add the scriptures up, and you'll soon see there'll be more brought out about how these waters increase and what that means, and how it's going to lift up and exalt Yahweh's house. Okay, the ark. The ark. Okay, think about that. Now, go down to 8. Look at 8, chapter 8. Look at verse 3. "And the waters receded continuously from the earth. At the end of 150 days, or 5 moons, the water decreased. And the ark rested in the 7th moon, the 17th day of the moon, at Abel." 7:17 at Abel. Okay, think on those things. Write those down. Think of the exaltation of the house of Yahweh. And let's go back in time a little bit here. Let's go all the way to the beginning of the books of Israel. The very first book of Israel. This is the very first one, 4:1703. Actually, the first book of Israel, the first chapter. And Pastor's talking here about Syria. This is right after the war was launched in Iraq in March of 2003. And Pastor says, you're going to see Israel expanded over to the great river Euphrates. That's why Syria is going to be next. Okay, and I brought a sermon back on 6:15-13 called Syrian Prophecy, right on target. And it showed how on 6:13, and I'll show you, just to remind you, 6:13, 2013, the America approved arming the Syrian rebels after the last quote-unquote chemical attack that took place that they're claiming that Bashar al-Assad did to his own people. Okay, that was on 6:13-213, and on 6:15, me and Pastor talked about this. Oh. Here's another article. June 13, 2013, 217. U.S. offers Syrian rebels military support, alleges Assad used chemical weapons. Notice the date. Very interesting. So I looked up, well, how many days has it been since Pastor gave this sermon on 4/17/03, which was, by the way, 14 years ago. Notice it was on 4/17. Are we not in the 4th Roman month in the 17th year right now? Okay, so I looked up to see how many days that is. Here it is. It was during the feast. It was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread that he gave that sermon. Okay? 5,103 days. And notice, it means a river, especially the Euphrates. But it also means, it's from, okay, hold on, that's 5103, okay. Let's see. Okay, a river, especially the Euphrates. And it says river, if you'll notice here, river, corresponding to 5102. And I'll find that 5102 for you here. Right here it means to flow, to assemble, to flow together. You remember this scripture? It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. Okay, this Syrian event is the beginning of the exaltation of Yahweh's house. And I did bring out at that sermon, Pastor said in 2003 that Syria would be next, and I reminded people that, they did go after Libya, but Libya is in North Africa, North Central Africa. It's not in the Middle East. And Pastor was talking about the Middle East, where the next war would take place. Okay, so continuing along. So this attack the other day that took place, Pastor called me. It was about, I don't remember, it was right around 9 o'clock at night. And he was very excited and told me about this attack that had just taken place. And I'm trying to get to the, here it is. Okay. This U.S. strikes Syria. 59 missiles fired in response to deadly chemical attack, or alleged deadly chemical attack. Here's, by the way, alleged. Why I say alleged, there's a lot of reasons why I say alleged, but here's one reason. Here's the map they show of the air base right here that they pummeled with the Tomahawk missiles. They have these towns surrounding it. You have Latakia, Idlib, Aleppo, Raqqa, and then the Shirate Air Base. And it spells Liars. Liars. Okay, they're liars, they're lying. Here's their real target right here, Damascus. Remember, Damascus will cease from being a city. These things here, these devices sometimes, it's like it's never a problem, any other time, until you get up here. By the way, think of 717 also. In Yahweh's name, 717. Yahweh will be exalted. Okay, Yahweh will be exalted, and He's going to bring them to this great house, the house of Yahweh. So this attack, Pastor called on 4-6, but the attack occurred also on 4-7 because it was Friday morning at 3:45, as the great deacon, great son of Israel, Abel, Jacob just brought out. It was at 3:45 in the morning. But I want to run this by you. 4-6 was the Thursday evening, and it means one. It's from the word abar. It means mighty one. It's from abar, and it's from Hebrew 82, and it means to fly, to soar. And it talks about the pinions of a hawk. The feathers, the flight feathers of a hawk. Okay, think of Psalm 91 when you read these things and the feathers that you should come to trust under. And it talks here about soaring and flying, that the hawk soars, and so on and so forth. That's 46. And then 47 in the Hebrew means mighty, valiant. It means strong, mighty, and it's also from abar. And it's which is 82. It says see Hebrew abir, and it means, it's the same word, 46, and it means one, mighty one. It's used of Yahweh when it talks about the mighty one. And then 48. Today's 48. Today's 4-8, right? Okay. Today means exalted Father. Exalted Father. There's your Father, okay? Exalted Father. And it's from two words, Ab, which means Abba, and then Room. That's how that's pronounced. And by the way, think of Abraham too, because his name ties back to this, and it ties into Luke 3:22. I brought that a while back, but I'll cover it again, maybe Yahweh willing, soon. It ties into Abraham, and think about Syria and Aram. The grandson of Abraham, okay, or grandson of Nahor. 73:11 means to be high or exalted. It means extol, exalt, exaltation, exalt, set apart, triumphant, that means like overcome and prevail. Think of the number 17, which means to prevail and overcome. It also means of highways, exalting highways. Let's look at that for a minute, because that's pretty interesting. If you remember this air base that was hit, it was hit by the USS Ross and the USS Porter by 59 Tomahawk missiles. 59 Tomahawk missiles. Tomahawk. It's an interesting word. But let's look a little deeper. 59, this has been brought up many, many times. It means, first of all, it means to go to market, to redeem. It's from 58, and it means to gather. To gather. Okay? To gather. And it means place of assembly. The place of assembly. For trials. To come and be tested, right? It means to gather. But where do we gather? Well, 59 in the Hebrew tells you where to gather, right? It tells you to gather at Abel. Abel. And if there's any doubt about where that's talking about, a city in northern Israel, well, it used to be, but it's moved here since then. Abilene, Texas. The place where the ark rested. Remember that? In the field of Yahshua of Beth-Shemesh. It gives all these, 1 Samuel 6:18, the great stone of Abel, 2 Samuel 20:14, all the tribes of Israel gathered to Abel. 2 Samuel 28:18, in old time they said, surely ask counsel at Abel, and that settled the matter. That's this word right here at 59. Hey, by the way, last night, speaking of highways, we've talked about Highway 83, right? Last night in Abelin, that was the sundown time. Take the zero out, it don't mean anything. Okay? But 803 does mean, it means sure foundation, solid pillar, established. Like it's not going anywhere, right? Let's look at Highway 83 since we're exalting highways. Again, remember 1894 was the length of Highway 83. It goes from West Hope, like the witness in the West. He is the hope of Israel. The witness in the West. Notice it starts at West Hope and it ends and goes through Abilene, goes through Laredo, and ends up down here at the very bottom in Brownsville. It's 1,894 miles. And there'll be some sons of Israel Abel will be talking about this at the feast. They've got some really wonderful stuff on this. But here's where it's from. It's from the word Abel, which is Abel. Abel. I mean, and look, the second son of Adam, Abel. Okay? Gee, what a coincidence. Word number 83 in the Hebrew means pinions, right? We just talked about. Think of Psalm 91:4 because it's that word wings. Under his wings you will trust. Psalm 91:4. It's the same word. Also think of Exodus 19:4. Let's read that real quick. Exodus 19:4. Because this is Yahweh's doing this again in these last days. It's going to be so much greater, okay? Exodus 19:4 on page 60 says, you have seen what I have done to Egypt and how I carried you on wings of eagles and brought you to myself. Brought you to myself. It means wings, and it's from, by the way, it's from 82. The same word that we've been seeing, and it means soars, to fly, the pinions of a hawk, so on and so forth. Now there's another highway that we're going to exalt here. Highway 59. I know I've talked about this at least one time. Notice when it was created. 1934. 1934. Isn't that when Abel was created? Wow. Gee, what a coincidence. And notice where it ends. It ends in Laredo, Texas. But it starts way up here in Lancaster, Minnesota, at the top of, by Canada, at the border of Canada. Goes through 7 states, including Oklahoma, okay, and Arkansas. So, you know, I got to thinking about this. I added up 59 and 83 and 59, and it came up to this number right here, 142. And it means to raise, to take up, to lift it up. It's from this word here that we're all familiar with, NASA, right? NASA, which means lifted, accepted. Same word used in Genesis 4:7. Will you not be accepted if you do righteousness? It means exalt, exalted, and exalting. Y'all remember down there at the peaceful scene, the peace van with the 7613 written on it? It means exaltation. And it's from the word NASA. Exaltation, dignity, authority, high position. Think of these things. Remember, this is the greatest gathering taking place right now. Did I show you I showed you Homs, Syria, how it's 758, and it means Syria, right? Can you all see this? The greatest gathering, 758, Syria. Remember, the exaltation, the greatest gathering has begun now, as the great Deacon Michael Ossoff just got done telling you. Is all this a coincidence? Praise Yahweh. It's Yahweh's coincidence. Okay? It's Yahweh speaking to us. The time is now. The time to gather at Abel is now. Are you excited about the feast? Okay, well, with getting all of our leaven out of our dwellings, let's also remember the leaven that's within. The leaven of the scribes and Pharisees, which is sin. We need to get sin out. We need to be ready for the feast. Let's get ready, okay? Let's remove all sin. Let's remove all sin from the camp. And at this time, it's my great honor and privilege to turn it over to the great Kohan Yisrayl Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may all be seated. Now, as we watch the news today, I want everyone to, on their piece of paper there in front of them, draw a square or a rectangle. That's fine, one or the other. And then number the corners, 1, 2, 3, 4, or you can put Russia, the UN, the EU, and the United States. And imagine inside that square, that's where all the death is. All of the death that you're going to see in the news, all of the trouble, the turmoil, the disease that we see in our society, the famines, all of that is inside that circle. And of course, these 4 corners that you're looking at, they're putting pressure on each other because they don't get along. They don't get along at all. In fact, they're showing a lot of hatred for each other. They see things in each other they detest. They cannot stand. And of course, they're all vying for a top position to rule the other ones. As, of course, that little horn, which is a spokesman for the Vatican, as Daniel called him, a little horn is doing himself. But in the news, we start off, and watch this. Every time you hear UN, Russia, United States, EU, look at your little square there and realize these 4 corners are responsible for what's taking place, and they're chopping at each other. They're accusing each other. They're wanting to get rid of each other. They're vying for that top position. Well, as we start out, of course, King Abdullah, which is the king of Jordan, he was in Washington, D.C. this week. Ironically, he was there just before the United States attacked Syria. It was after this chemical attack, which, of course, no one knows where these chemicals come from yet, but it was decided very quickly by some governmental officials that it was the Assad regime that did so. But notice as they meet, and keep in mind that Jordan, remember Kanya Didia brought this years ago. Jordan is the caretakers of the Temple Mount. And that agreement was formed October the 26th of 1994 between Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, mostly Israel and Jordan, about the Temple Mount for them to be caretakers and kind of oversee it and keep the rules, make sure the rules are adhered to. But of course, notice that Donald Trump praises him, President Donald Trump praises him for being a great warrior. And of course, remember what Pastor said about these meetings. They meet to deliver messages. They meet to tell things, to inform things. And of course, later, the next day, we see this attack in Syria. Now, we have the former British ambassador to Syria. So he was a British ambassador to Syria. He refers to this strike in Syria as a dog returning to its own vomit, comparing what occurred between the U.S. and Iraq as being the same thing as the U.S. and Syria. Of course, remember, many allegations were made, accusations were made that Saddam Hussein and Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, just to find out they had no weapons whatsoever. And that country is still in chaos at this time, much chaos. Then Congressman Massey. This is very interesting. Watch the lady that does the CNN news reporting. She's asking Congressman Massey about what he thinks about the Assad regime and these chemical weapons, and he very quickly says, well, I don't think the Assad regime had anything to do with it. Watch the total disgust on this woman's face and how when the interview is done, it's done. She wants nothing else to do with him. But at least he's speaking some truth there. And then, of course, Iran is saying these are bogus allegations that are being put against the Assad regime. Now, everybody agrees that these strikes are helping ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Catholic Church, whatever you want to use for their name. But, of course, that's what they're actually helping. They're calling them terrorists, but, of course, it's amazing these terrorists want Assad removed, just like some other countries. Another thing that was very important to notice, remember these things can take place in 1 hour, where these 59 Tomahawk missiles, they're 1,000 pounds apiece, the United States launched them, 59 missiles in 60 seconds. And they hit 59 missiles in 60 seconds. Now, there are some reports saying that some of these missiles were off target, but no one's brought forth where they hit if it wasn't the target they were supposed to hit. And, of course, Russia, President Vladimir Putin is saying that this is an act of aggression. It's breaking international law. And they also say that they're going to cut ties, operation agreement ties, with communication in Syria. Then Bolivia. This is very important because Bolivia, they're speaking at the UN Security Council. Remember, that's one of the four horns. Bolivia is one of those small countries that the only way they feel they have a way to speak is to go to the UN, and of course they're part of the Security Council. Keep in mind, though, this month of April, the UN Security Council, the president is also the United States, which is Nikki Haley, who is the UN ambassador. She is also the president for this month. But notice how much he detests what the United States has done. And he's speaking out against what they've done. So remember Bolivia and watch what takes place with them. France and, of course, in the European Union, they show support. They're supporting the decision of the United States to attack Syria and to shoot these missiles at Syria. Turkey also supporting and slamming Russia again. They're kind of, you tend to wonder how one week we hear from the news that we're going to support Assad. We just heard Rex Tillerson, who is the Secretary of State for the United States, just say that last week. We just showed it, where he said they're fine with Assad staying. And then we get to this next week. We started out the week where Russia or the United States could attack North Korea at any time, to actually attacking Syria, to Assad can stay, to Assad must go. So it's very quickly done, and of course instructions are being given in all of these things. People are being told what to do, and they're adhering to instructions, or they suffer consequences of not adhering. While all of this is taking place, of course, reports coming out of Asia that China and Japan, they're actually calling this a World War III scenario, where they're actually in a disagreement over some islands. Don't be confused with Japan being this small country and China being this large country and thinking Japan can't do anything. World War II showed how much Japan can do to China. And they took control. They actually put China in a bind at that time. And then last but not least, remember this is supposed to be the land of the free, where you have freedom of speech and can say the things you want to say, as long as you're not making threats of assault. Well, at least if you're a citizen. If you're a government official, obviously you can make them and you can bomb people. But what they're trying to push, and this is Senator Jean Shaheen, now she's a lead senator from New Hampshire. She's pushing to have RT, CGTV, which is China television, and all other forms of media removed from the United States. They're looking to have it so you can't see it. They actually referred to Russia as the Nazis of the 1930s and 40s. So with all of these things you're seeing, don't forget the four that are responsible for all the death that you see. If we could go ahead and please play the news.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrayl Hawkins. Well, Russia Today news media is the target of one senator's proposed bill claiming RT is using Nazi propaganda to shift thinking in the U.S. through their news reporting. We also see China and Japan continuing their longtime rivalry with new fears things could escalate quickly. But first, the world is taking sides as more than 80 Syrian civilians appear to be killed in a chemical weapons attack. Now, the alleged perpetrators, and we do mean alleged, nothing has been proven, of the attack is Bashar al-Assad and his army. Now, this comes as King Jordan's king, was headed to the United States for his second meeting with President Trump.
Interesting. And Jordan and the United States have always had pretty friendly relations in history. King Abdullah met with President Trump at the White House to talk about how to stop ISIS. At a press conference in the Rose Garden, Trump built up his Jordanian partner, as well as made mention of bringing Assad to justice for the chemical attack on Syrian civilians that had taken place just the day before. Let's take a listen.
Your Majesty, thank you for being with us today. Very much appreciated. This is our second meeting since my inauguration, but our first at the White House. Very special place, I can tell you that. I've gotten to know it well. Long hours, very special. It's really an honor to welcome you here today, but before we begin, let me say a few words about recent events. Yesterday, a chemical attack that was so horrific in Syria against innocent people, including women, small children, and even beautiful little babies. Their deaths was an affront to humanity. These heinous actions by the Assad regime cannot be tolerated. The United States stands with our allies across the globe to condemn this horrific attack and all other horrific attacks for that matter. Your Majesty, Jordanians are known for their legendary hospitality, and we will do our very best to be equally gracious hosts. They're also known, however, I have to say this, for their fighting ability. And you are a great warrior, and we appreciate it. Thank you. In King Abdullah, America is blessed with a thoughtful and determined partner. He is a man who has spent years commanding his country's special forces. He really knows what being a soldier is, that I can tell you. And he knows how to fight. The king has been a leader in calling for a plan to defeat ISIS once and for all. And I'm with you on that. We're both leaders on that, believe me. That's what we speak about today, and that is what we are going to do. And it'll be a shorter fight than a lot of people are thinking about. Believe me, we've made tremendous strides, as we discussed.
Well, as you mentioned, Katan, you can see they're on the same side here.
That's right.
Well, the former British ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, spoke with RT about the U.S.'s decision to strike Assad's forces after it was alleged that they again used chemical weapons on their people. While the United Kingdom supports the U.S.'s decision to send missiles to bomb the region, Ford says they have delivered the verdict before deliberating on the evidence, and what needs to have happened and may yet happen is a proper UN investigation. But the damage is done, he said, and not just the immediate damage to the airport, which, by the way, was being used in the fight against ISIS.
Yeah, you can't take those missiles back after they've gone out. But he continued, what Trump's stupid action has done is make it more likely that chemical weapons will be used. Why? Because if you are a jihadist, would you not be a jihadist this morning? Would you not be planning false flag operations to make sure that more American involvement would be brought on Assad's head? Well, of course you would. And jihadists have already mounted false flag operations with chlorine, Ford said, that was documented in a UN report from August of 2016.
Well, looking at things from the perspective of the Syrian government, when asked what motivation Bashar al-Assad would have had to carry out such an attack, Ford was convinced, saying they had absolutely zero motive for doing it and 100 reasons not to do it. Only days before Trump had put an olive branch, or put out an olive branch, you know, the sign of peace there,
yep,
in their direction. It's incredible, Ford said, at all that Assad would respond with a two-finger gesture. It is literally incredible.
Well, Mr. Ford believes that jihadists and their backers are simply manipulating the situations to sway world leaders to attack the terrorist enemies instead of them. Ford compared current events with how British and American intelligence agencies accused Saddam Hussein of having weapons of mass destruction and taking him out, but they found no evidence for their claims. So, Ford said, we're like a dog returning to its vomit.
Well, to the surprise of CNN reporter Kate Baldwin, Republican Congressman Tom Massey also could not understand why Bashar al-Assad would have used chlorine gas on his own people. Massey told Baldwin, it's hard to know what's happening in Syria right now. I'd like to know specifically how that release of chemical gas, if it did occur, and it looks like it did, how that occurred. Because frankly, I don't think Assad would have done that. It does not serve his interest, he said. It would tend to draw us into that civil war even further. So they're making great points.
Excellent points. Why would he terrorize his own people?
That's right.
1 point. 2, why would he continue to bring the hammer down of these international countries that are fighting against his regime, because it make matters worse for him. So it really seems like, according to what they're saying, it doesn't make tactical or practical sense. Right. Dumbfounded, Boulden further questioned the congressman, pointing out he seemed to be siding with Assad's position and what Russians were saying as well over his own colleagues in the United States and human rights observers. Well, again, Massey answered, I don't think it would have served Assad's purpose to do a chemical attack on his own people. So it's hard for me to understand why he would do that if he did.
Also coming to the aid of the Syrian government was Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif. He has strongly condemned the U.S. missile strike against Syria, which he says were carried out on, quote, bogus allegations. Mr. Zarif tweeted, not even 2 decades after 9/11, U.S. military fighting on the same side as Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Yemen and Syria. Time to stop hype and cover-ups.
Well, in further tweets, the foreign minister went on to say the U.S. helped former Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein build chemical weapons to use against Iran during their imposed war. Now, Zarif pointed out Washington attacks Syria over the same banned arms, an obvious double standard. Iran, as a country, having been victims of weapons of mass destruction, condemns any use of chemical weapons, Zarif added.
Iran is not the only country speaking out against the U.S. decision. The Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said President Putin is calling the U.S. airstrikes an act of aggression against a sovereign country carried out using an invented pretext, he said. So, in other words, Katan, Russia is saying someone is making up reasons to retaliate against Assad to overthrow his government. Now, Moscow also says the strikes violate international law.
Furthermore, Peskov shared the UN chemical weapons watchdog has documented that the Syrian army does not have any chemical weapons at the moment. He also added that President Vladimir Putin sees the use of chemical weapons by terrorists is being ignored by the U.S. and other countries, and this is further causing the situation in Syria to deteriorate. Russia also believes the U.S. strike on Syria is a distraction for the international community to turn their attention away from the hundreds of Syrian and Iraqi civilians who are claimed to be victims of other U.S. airstrikes in the past month.
Well, our chief field correspondent, Larry McGee, has also been following this story for us and has details on the controversy brewing over the attacks. Larry, what seems to be the complaint?
The issue that many people are having stems from doubt related to the Syrian government's participation in the recent attacks. Among the most vocal opponents of the U.S.'s assertions regarding the attack is former Congressman Ron Paul, who contributed his thinking on the matter in an interview with reporters this week. The former government official says that he doesn't believe the evidence is there, and as was the case with Iraq, he believes the incident in question provided an excuse for the U.S. and its coalition partners to bomb Syria. Mr. Paul says he can't see how the attacks could conceivably be what they claim because it's helping ISIS, it's helping Al-Qaeda, and it's helping the enemy that the U.S. and its partners are supposedly fighting. On the question of why the president seemingly rushed into the attacks overnight without waiting for congressional support or further investigation, the former congressman responded that he didn't know, but from his viewpoint and analysis, there was no need to rush. He stated that there was no threat to our national security, and the current administration has to give a reason for doing these things, but there was a rush into it, and he doesn't know what the president's purpose was. The former government leader ventured to say later that it might have been to avoid debate on the topic, since the last effort to debate the subject resulted in a loss. Mr. Paul supposes that it might have then seemed necessary for the president to jump on this before people came to know what was really going on. Amid observations such as that given by the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev that the U.S.'s actions could be pushing things to the brink of a U.S.-Russian war, Ron Paul stated that that is the real danger. But for right now, in his viewpoint, he sees this as a sort of victory for the neoconservatives who have been saying Assad has to go. He noted what he sees as the hypocrisy of the U.S. in saying, on one hand, that it is fighting against terrorist groups in the region, but then on the other hand, it is carrying out attacks which strengthen those same groups. The outspoken talk show host says, all of this is why he is a proponent for the policy of U.S. non-interventionism. He says that while there are problems around the world, he does not believe that the American people and the American government should be the policemen of the world. The former statesman holds that that approach brings the U.S. more trouble, more grief, and more financial problems, and contrary to the stated purpose, it is motivated, he says, by things other than defense of the U.S. Constitution. The latest turmoil has also reportedly brought a halt to peace talks. The former congressman says he just wishes that people would demand to hear the truth before they decided to go and start another war. Leading up to the attacks, the international atmosphere was tense as media outlets reported on the use of sarin gas in Syria that resulted in the deaths of over 80 Syrian citizens. Employing nerve gas is banned by international law, and its use is categorized as a war crime. As the news circulated, President Trump said something has got to happen. That something was the controversial strike against the Syrian government that targeted a single airfield in the nation, which was asserted to be the location from which the plane that allegedly dropped the chemical weapons took off. Close to 60 Tomahawk cruise missiles were reportedly launched from ships in the eastern Mediterranean aimed at different positions around the airfield, including hangars and fuel storage depots, and they were all coordinated to explode within the same space of 60 seconds. That was nearly 60 1,000-pound warheads, all exploding within a mere minute. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff. Back to you.
Well, this latest round of events by U.S. President Trump has definitely added more fuel to the fire. Well, as we continue forward with the conflicts among the nations, the United Nations Security Council met to discuss the recent actions of the use of force in Syria by the United States. The Bolivian representative opened with remarks concerning the matter, and let's go ahead and take a listen to what he had to say.
We'll now take statements from council members, and we will start by giving the floor to the representative from Bolivia.
Madam President, thank you for giving me the floor, and also for having convening this open meeting of the Security Council. It's vital that not only the members of our organization, but also the whole world should see that the positions of the members of the Security Council in a totally transparent way, given what has taken over recent days in Syria.
Bolivia ha solicitado la convocatoria de esta reunión preocupada por los sucesos que se han registrado en las últimas horas. Mientras el Consejo de Seguridad debatía propuestas sobre cuál iba a ser el mecanismo de investigación de los horribles ataques con armas químicas de los que ha sido testigo la humanidad. Mientras discutíamos las palabras que se iban a utilizar en una resolución que debía ser tratada por este Consejo, mientras los miembros permanentes y los miembros no permanentes planteábamos propuestas para el texto de esa resolución, Estados Unidos preparaba a su vez y ejecutaba un ataque unilateral. Los ataques con misiles, por supuesto, son una acción unilateral y representan una grave amenaza a la paz y seguridad internacional. ¿Por qué? Porque a lo largo de los últimos 70 años, la humanidad ha construido una estructura no solamente física, no solamente institucional, sino además una estructura legal. Ha construido instrumentos de derecho internacional para evitar justamente que los más poderosos ataquen con impunidad a los más débiles, para garantizar un equilibrio en el mundo y evitar, por supuesto, que hayan gravísimas violaciones a la paz y seguridad internacional. Creemos que es deber de este Consejo, pero no solamente del Consejo, de la Organización de Naciones Unidas en todos sus órganos, defender al multilateralismo. Estamos aquí para defender al multilateralismo. Hemos acordado que esta carta, la Carta de Naciones Unidas, tiene que ser respetada. Y esta carta prohíbe las acciones unilaterales. No son solamente los 15 miembros que estamos sentados en esta mesa. Nosotros representamos a los 193 estados de esta organización y a través de ellos a los pueblos del mundo. Y hemos acordado que las acciones unilaterales violan el derecho internacional. The Security Council has primary responsibility for international peace and security. That's my appeal, that everything should be handled within the framework of the United Nations Charter. The use of force is lawful only when in exercise of self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, and or when Security Council approves such action.
Well, he was certainly not shy about making those comments.
He sure wasn't.
Well, French President Francois Hollande gave supporting words to the U.S. President Trump's actions with the missile strikes in Syria, calling it a necessary response to a horrible tragedy. He also said that these actions were a response and should be considered on the international level to impose sanctions against Bashar al-Assad to prevent the future use of chemical weapons. Although not everyone in France is supporting President Trump's decision, French presidential candidate Le Pen said that Mr. Trump has said on multiple occasions that the United States would stop being the policeman in the world, but that's exactly what they did.
The Turkish President Erdogan criticized the Russian president for its support for the Syrian president following the recent chemical attacks in the war-torn country. The Russian President Vladimir Putin said that the chemicals were the result of an attack on a stockpile of chemical weapons belonging to the militants. Erdogan also called on President Trump to back up his words on Syria with actions. Trump also said that he was considering unilateral actions against the government of the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad.
Well, continuing on the recent missile strike on the Syrian airbase, Vladimir Stovenkov said that the attack was a flagrant violation of international law. Major General Igor Konashenkov said that the missile attack on the Sherat airfield violated Russia's agreement to cooperate with the U.S. in the fight against ISIS.
Regarding that attack in Syria by the alleged use of chemical weapons, so far, Jeff, as you already mentioned, 80 people have been killed as a result. Now, again, that attack was blamed on Assad and his regime, but keep in mind that the U.S. led an airstrike in Mosul recently that killed over 200 people. Now, in both cases, the governments claimed that terrorist munitions had been targeted. The Syrian attack attracted international media attention and criticism from Western officials, but surprisingly, the Mosul attack led by the U.S., United States, and their coalition, it went virtually under the radar. Nobody really knew about it.
Well, there's tensions in the East China Sea over 8 islands that are controlled by Japan, but China contests their ownership. Now, those islands uninhabited as they are close to shipping lanes, rich fishing resources, and close to potential oil and gas reserves. Now, China had been flying its military jets in Japan's airspace, and Japan is now doubling its military response.
Experts say that the risk of an accidental confrontation between the two countries is rising and could draw in other countries like the U.S. Well, these tensions will more than likely become a focal point of talks between the U.S. president and Chinese president at an upcoming meeting between the two very soon. This dispute over the islands could, of course, they're saying, trigger a much bigger conflict.
And as far as that the accident, we hear a lot about that they're saying a war can be accidentally started. That's kind of a crazy thought, but hear more and more about that.
That's right.
Well, is RT News tied to the Nazis? Well, some might think so, as this latest attack against the news organization comes from a U.S. senator from New Hampshire as she took to the Senate floor for the purpose of, quote, exposing RT to America, claiming that RT somehow hides its funding. Now, public records found on the internet show that RT has a network of stations, including RT America, that is controlled by the Russian government.
Yeah. Senator Shaheen from New Hampshire wants to propose a bill for the United States Justice Department to investigate foreign media organizations for potential violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act and to compel them to disclose their funding. Well, this would include agencies such as, of course, RT, BBC, Al Jazeera, and so forth, as they are funded by their country of origin. But Senator Shaheen targeted RT specifically because she said that Russia is an adversary to the United States.
In her address on the Senate floor, she said the Foreign Agents Registration Act was created in the 1930s in response to concerns about Nazi propaganda being disseminated in the U.S. without people knowing what it was, and this is appropriate today to take a look at what Russia and other countries may be doing to our news.
Well, in her address, she cited foreign news agencies, particularly RT, of false reporting. Although the examples that she used, such as the one regarding the CIA wiretapping Trump Towers, was cited, that article that RT presented in their news source was actually sourced from ABC News. Now, ABC News is a United States news network, but nothing was said by Shaheen about ABC News in her accusations of RT bringing those false reports. Some might say that RT is not as critical against the Russian government, but that's a far cry from accusing it of false reporting, and that was, of quote from one of their reporters, Guyan Chichikan, saying that, that might be so, but we're not reporting false news to the public. Well, war is on the horizon, and words are the precursor to the actions that will bring us and this entire planet to the brink of destruction. There's no solution for mankind in the way that he's going now. From the leaders to the youngest person, everyone is suffering from a lack of positive character education. Well, President Trump may have offered an olive branch to others in an effort for peace, but you can't truly have peace unless you grasp hold of the chosen branch, Yisrayl Hawkins. Well, he and the house of Yahweh has the peaceful solution that the world needs, a solution that can actually stop all wars. Intrigued? Well, contact the house of Yahweh to find out more.
And when you do, don't forget to request your free Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abelin, Texas, 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. Don't forget, you can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can email them at info@yahweh.com. Any international calls, please call the number that's on your screen. And once again, we'd like to remind you of two great Bible study tools on the market today. You can learn about the Yisrael Says program by going to www.yisraelsays.com and learn about the Ask Yisrael program by going to www.askyisrael.com. You will certainly be glad you did.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, the man who is called the branch, Yisrayl Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.
This time, if everyone will please stand, I would like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan Yisrael Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. Wow, it's full. We're a part of the full house. Praise Yahweh. They're all yours, Yahweh. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. The way the wars are going, surely anyone can see that by now. The wars are in progress, and they're not going to get better. You can mark Yahweh's word on that. Let me get my note here. The Monday, be sure and mark this down, put it in your memory. Don't forget. Monday, this coming Monday, 6:45 p.m., you really need to be seated here in the sanctuary, 6:45 p.m. The service is Yeshua's memorial, and it will start at sunset, but there'll be services leading up to his memorial that we will do at sunset. And then right after Yeshua's memorial will be sprinkling. You really need this sprinkling. As much so as you needed as the children of Israel needed the blood of the lamb on their doorposts, even the Egyptians that put it on their doorposts lived through it. You need to remember this. It's a thing that that you've got to have. This blood of Yeshua you've got to have to get through this. that's coming. The campgrounds this morning, I started about 6. I could have started about 4 if I'd had anyone to preach to at that time. I just noticed some tents down there this morning, so I asked the camera men to get down there and the photographers to get down there and get some pictures. That front, it is such a peaceful scene, and that's what it is. And if you can imagine the whole world being like this very, very soon, and of course the laws of Yahweh all being kept. This is tents that's already here. These are not refugees. Maybe they are. Maybe they are and refugees, but they're here to keep the feast, and their tents are set up. Several of them already set up. I'm glad you came early. This right here is the most beautiful thing. That's the mammoth donkey that someone donated to the house of Yahweh, and here he is with his mother. In the background there, you can see the refugee camp, which the great music doctor in the house of Yahweh, Yisrayl Hawkins, brought out this morning about the refugee camp and it being closed, and then the sign, I think they put that on an old car door that was blown up by a bomb or something. And then one next to it saying, "Go to the house of Yahweh, it's never going to be closed." Beautiful. I have articles here. I told you about last week that these articles about the nuclear baby, and of course this bombing that just took place has prompted some newspaper reporters to write about this, and the actual beginning of this, which we put in the book before this bombing took place. Now, before it took place, we told you about it in the book, The Nuclear Baby. It told you the exact date it would start. I should have put the exact time in there. We could do that now. But anyway, that book was printed before this ever came out, got a lot of attention, and of course it was stopped according to Revelation 7. But the Jewish Policy Center actually ran this story: the attack on Syria's El Kabar nuclear faculty. And he writes an article on how this one that just started, this war in Syria, the bombing that just took place in Syria, how it's a repeat of what took place on the date that Yahweh gave for it to start. And there's several articles. Here's all of this is about the same thing. But it says, Israeli September 6th, 2007. Attack on Syria's Al-Kabar. That's what we put in the book, and that's what's shown in Revelations. 2007, and we brought that out that year, put the book out, and then the wars took place. It actually we started on it, started bringing this information out in 2006, that it would start on 2007 and give the date September the 6th. It did start. Several articles here on the same thing. And then there's one article that it said a general, U.S. general, started off with, I thought they said 7 bombs. I was told this morning it was 6. They only found 5. They've never found the 6th bomb. So it's somewhere out there, a nuclear bomb, and to continue this war. And of course, the one general, it says, he single-handedly stopped this war. But of course, we know it was Yahweh. It was, but the general was inspired to pull the strings that actually stopped it. Let's see, where will it go from here? Well, of course, you can expect this right here. It's not going to stop, and they'll keep on till they kill 1/3 of the people over that 4th part of the earth in and around the great river Euphrates. And that strike right there was right on the edge of the great river Euphrates. And here's the picture of President Bush and, of course, one of the cabinet members of Israel. We witnessed to these people, the dignitaries, the foreign ministers that were stationed in Israel. We met with them, and dignitaries came here and they said, I can't believe y'all have met all these people. And they knew most of them, or a lot of them, they said. Here's a picture now that they're running that shows the plant, the nuclear depot that they actually bombed. And but what I was saying, we met with these people and told them what was going to take place according to prophecy. Now, we also gave them the peaceful solution, and of course, 30-something teachers met all together, and I spoke to them at one time. They all wanted the peaceful solution in all the schools in Israel at that time. It wasn't time for it. It wasn't time for this to take place, but we witnessed to them. They said this is the only thing that's ever going to work. And they were very joyous that we brought this before this started. Also, we witnessed to Azerbaijan, Georgia, Afghanistan. They were all fixed to set up where we could teach all their teachers in all of these nations at one time. And they said, we can do it, and had it set up to do so. But it wasn't time. We were merely witnessing and showing what it could be under Yahweh's government, the peaceful solution. and they saw that. They all saw it. They all agreed to it. But it wasn't time to do it, and now we're reaching all the nations, and we got signs going up, make not war. Look at this. You're going to see a lot of that. Well, the U.S. envoy to UN threatens further military action in Syria. That's not a guess. That's actually shown in Scripture. This book, if you read this book, I don't have time to read this today, but it confirms this prophecy in the nuclear baby. This is the book of Yisrayl. It is book of Yisrayl, 7th book of Yisrayl. He who rules is Yahweh, teacher of righteousness, part 2. And on page 139, it shows, this one is highlighted, yours won't be, but it started in chapter 15, and it's got, you need to read the whole thing, but those 3-4 pages there are all about this nuclear war and when it actually started. when it actually started, then Yahweh held it back and doing the work that he's doing today. North Korea vows most ruthless blow on the United States after Donald Trump pledges to build up defenses against Pyongyang. I think that's somewhere close. And you will see more of this also, a great amount of this. Let me get back to my notes here. Now, normally I hear the voice of one man singing starting when I turn the lights on and let everyone know I'm up. I hear a man singing outside my window on Sabbath morning. He's a great deacon, Yisrayl Hawkins. Praise Yahweh. Amen. And one of our great musicians and great singers, great singing voice. This morning, they added to that, I had a quartet this morning. It was beautiful. And that crowd's growing too. It's a great gathering taking place under my windows, what I see. And imagine this whole parking lot here full of people singing at 6 a.m. on Sabbath morning. That's part of the free food that we get. We have free physical food too at that time of the morning. Sorry, 6:30. It's actually before that, but I'm not supposed to let them hear this, you know. The joy that we share on Sabbath morning is just, it delights the heart. Today the quartet sung for the first time, and beginning of the feast. We always start things early. And then the photographers, the great Samuel Bang Hawkins and David Knighton Hawkins, both deacons in the house. They were out taking pictures of the camp and refugee camps, and that was written in, you notice, blood red on that refugee camp. Refugee camp closed permanently very soon. And of course the wars, the nations are angry. That's going on. Revelations 11:17. If I can find it here, the great deaconess, Sister Matthews. I bet I left that laying on my desk. I did, I think. Maybe not. Maybe I'll get to it. Here it is. She was all excited this morning. In fact, she was jumping up and down, so I was jarring the table over here, and she's several states away. But that's the television that we're getting. This, she said, we're on Times Square. Here's the picture. Times Square, if you can see the great gathering there taking place. That's in Times Square. And of course it gives you Remya, the same one that's used in the song. You need to get that song and learn it now. Don't just halfway do it. I want to hear everybody's voice. I can do that. I can pick you out. And I can lie too, but make sure, because don't be squeaky. And Yahweh said He doesn't tell you to be pretty, have a pretty voice. He tells you to make it loud. He says, like a loud noise unto Him. So get it to where you can sing it aloud. But here's the article that Sister Matthews was so excited about. Now, by the way, we put four articles 4 news articles out this week, and about this greatest gathering that's taking place. Yisrayl Hawkins says the world's greatest gathering of righteous people. And if I can get this is what she is so excited about, was the number. This is a record breaker. Already in one group of news, it was 73,363. 73,363, and that number probably means something. Don't fail to look it up. Now, the other one that was a few days earlier than this, Yisrayl Hawkins publishes series on greatest gathering of people on earth, and released part 2 in the New Post. And that one, I think that was about Tuesday or Wednesday. It's up to 95,522. Another one that we released, Yisrayl Hawkins states the house of Yahweh is involved in the greatest gathering of all times of the people of all nations. And that one is up to 90,799. Here's the big one. Yisrayl Hawkins says the world's greatest gathering of righteous people is taking place now in latest post, and that is up to 78,547,589. And if I can get a television, we could get the latest number here, because I got this about 6 o'clock this morning. It was about 6 a.m. Things are really joyous around here at 6 a.m., and it keeps getting better throughout the day. Watch for this one now. The Pope is going to visit Egypt in April. This says April 28 and 29. I can hardly wait to see what takes place after that visit. Egypt is greatly involved in prophecy. That too is in the book of Yisrael. I've talked a lot about it. Be turning over to Revelations 11. This is the time period that we see here of the 2 witnesses, of course. And when I left off last week, it was, if you remember, is in Revelations 13, talking about the U.S., the United States, the beast that rose up where there was no multitudes, nations, and languages. And of course, that was the land in which the 2 witnesses were born, and which is America, and was spoken of in Zechariah, the 5th chapter, to establish a house in a Babylonian land not yet established. And where it wasn't established, wasn't even discovered until 1492. 1492. That name, that date also rings a bell in Book 2, because the same date is given to us in 1492, 1492, and 1434, 1934 is also given to us BC, or should be BY, in Book 1. So this right here that we see now, these prophecies here, started in Genesis, actually Genesis 4, 3 and 4, where mankind was shut off from salvation, from the tree of life. And then it was instruction then came later as to when that tree of life would be given in Genesis 49, where he prophesied about a work of a donkeys, 2 of them that the Savior came riding. Donkeys. Got it? Praise Yahweh. Oh yeah, up to 79,000. That's that's more than 1,000 an hour here that is coming up. 73, that's over 6,000 rise right there. Wow. if we can get this thought back in your mind now, that in Genesis 49, he tells you when salvation, the tree of life, would actually be made possible again. All these religions and everything that came, Christian religions, they're all a bunch of baloney, like Christmas and Halloween and Easter, all a bunch of lies, as Yeshua said, and the prophet said also. But in Genesis 49, it says, it won't be. This scepter is going to be held by wicked people, evil people, that Hosea said would be spared. They would be spared. Yes, Yada will be spared for the purpose, of course, of bringing forth this work. It says mercy there in the King James Version, but it's not mercy. I don't know why that they did those things. I guess to throw you off and deceive you. But anyway, the word is spared for the purpose of bringing forth Yeshua, who would die for our sins, whose memorial we celebrate Monday evening, after sunset Monday evening. Now, that's Yeshua, the blood of the Lamb. If you can imagine what the microorganisms, when Yahweh told Moshe to tell the children of Israel, which the word got out to others, it got out to the Egyptians, and some said, we better do this, and they were spared. But the ones that, and they probably came out with Moshe, probably were actually half Egyptian and half Hebrew, because of the fact that Yosef, if you remember, married the Egyptian queen, and from that came Ephraim and Manasseh, and it was a pot of fire, and of course that fire is still burning today in the veins, in the bloodline of the world today. I'll get to all of this one of these days and explain it in detail. I could just unscrew the top of your head and pour everything I know down in your head right now, but it doesn't work that way. But anyway, what Yahweh said would come down to us was led by Yada the lion. Everybody wants a lion for a leader, right? Well, he's got his hand on your neck whether you like it or not. And Yahweh's way was given up. The words of life was actually given up, which Moshe brought. Yahweh had Moshe offer them to these 12 tribes, saying, this could be now if you'll follow these laws. Of course, they didn't follow the laws, but there were certain people that was spared in this bunch that brought forth actually a holy, righteous, clean, pure blood. And that was Yeshua's family, who practiced the laws of Yahweh. They didn't have a Walmart store, or, they'd have probably trotted over there. After Abelin is given to us, they'll probably want to go to Dallas to go shopping on Friday. All of that was out. These people had their mind on this holy blood and cleansing the blood instead of contaminating it with the filth of the earth. I was reading an article this week that was showing how when you drive up to a parking lot where shopping is done, when the minute you stick your foot to the ground, you got toxins on it. And the doctor was saying that doctors don't treat. They don't guide against these things. They treat symptoms. But he said they carry this into the store, all over the stores. So you walk around in this filth. And he said, you may think you've escaped, but EPA says 100% of the people that do this have these toxins in their fat and in their blood stored there. And Yahweh says, come out from among them. Don't go to these places. Get out of there and leave those people alone. Touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. Touch it, and I won't receive you, is what he's saying. Well, Yeshua's family, they resisted this stuff. They wouldn't touch the unclean thing. Therefore, we had a Savior. We're trying now to cleanse our blood right now in the house. It's going to be needed. Yeshua's blood, he's the Lamb of Yahweh. Yeshua is the Lamb of Yahweh. In fact, Yochanan said, behold the Lamb of Yahweh. He had clean blood to offer, to pay for sin, which is defiled. Sin defiles the blood. What is sin? Sin right now is going and getting your feet into this mess all over the ground, all over the pavements, all over the stores. This man, he was so adamant about this and showing how evil, how sickening this is, because people are dying from it. And they don't even know why they're sick. But he says it eats at your sinuses. It eats at your heart. It gets in your blood. That's what Isaiah said in Isaiah 65. He said, if you buy something to wear, it should be cotton. And he says that's the only thing that he knows of that is clean. He says if you buy this other stuff and you smell of it like this, you're getting a dose of it right there. He said the synthetic materials, they use unclean stuff to make pesticides that get into your body, into the fat, and stored there. 100% of the people have it. 100%. That's what, I've got the facts on it. I'm going to bring it during the feast. Somebody is. He's saying, get cotton sheets if you can afford it. If you don't, you're going to lay down in that filth. If you take your clothing to a dry cleaner's, he said, you'll get it back smelling pretty. He said, hang that out on your patio until you can't smell it any longer, because it's not safe to put on. Now that's how adamant this man was, and the article goes on and on. It's several pages, trying to tell you how filthy this world is. They say it off and on in different articles. You know, you can get bits and pieces. But this one is trying to get people to stop and trying to get EPA to change their laws. But EPA is not going to change their laws. There's too much money in it. Well, here in Revelations now, we come down to our time, and Yahweh's saying, clean yourselves up. He says, touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. That's in Corinthians. The great apostle Shaul wrote about this and said, come out from among them, be separate, touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. In Revelations 11, we see this, verse 18. We see at the same time the nations are angry. Revelations 11 is the chapter of the two witnesses. That's shown in 3 and 4. There are the 2 lampstands and the 2 olive trees spoken of in Zechariah, who work with the king, the clean-blooded Savior, Yeshua Messiah, to build the house of Yahweh, of clean people who will repent of sin, come out from among them, yes, and be separate from them. In verse 15 of chapter 11 of Revelations, and the 7th Malak Seventh. Got a seventh Malak here in this same chapter of the two witnesses that actually builds the house of Yahweh, the kingdom. The seventh Malak sounded, that is, he began to teach, to show the things. There were great voices. That word is actually, it means large quantity of voices. A large quantity of voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of Yahweh, the kingdoms of this world, have now become the kingdoms of our Father and of His Messiah. Yet that work has started, is what he's saying here. The work of the two witnesses, and this is the seventh work, the seventh lamp, the two witnesses, and he says, now this work is going, the greatest gathering ever, as spoken of in Jeremiah, the 23rd chapter. They'll no longer even talk about that where they put the blood on the doorpost. They're going to talk about us who started eating the body and blood of Yahshua. And I don't mean eating flesh literally, I mean taking Him into our lives and being like Him. That's the body and blood of Yahshua that we will be taking Monday evening at sunset. You need that. Not on your doorpost, but in your heart and your mind. You need it desperately. And we will reign forever and ever. This is the kingdom that Yahweh is speaking of here, that you are a part of. Did you get that? Every one of you, you're a part of that kingdom. The house of Yahweh is the kingdom of Yahweh. Yes, praise Yahweh. And the 24 elders, that is not 24, it's a large number of elders who sat before Yahweh on their seats, fell on their faces, and worshiped Yahweh, saying, we give you thanks, O Yahweh, Almighty, Almighty, meaning Almighty, meaning He's above all the gods, just like He showed when He brought the children of Israel out of Egypt. Yes, the God worship is fun. The God worship is sin. Any kind of sin, any amount of sin, that's God worship. Yahweh tells you to come out from it and don't do it anymore. Let him who stole steal no more. Yeshua said it too. Who is and was and is to come, because you have taken your great power and have begun to reign. We've just begun. This is the beginning of what is going to build to the greatest gathering ever to take place. It's as sure as the bombing of Syria. It's as sure as the nuclear bomb that can darken the sun. Yes, all of this is as sure as those events right there that was named ahead of time before they were ever created, and they were named to be started in this generation. And the nations were angry, and your wrath, this is King James writing here. I don't know how it got here. But no, Yahweh is not wrathful. He's very loving and kind, and He says, you should have done this. You shouldn't have done that. You should do this. Is to come, and the time of the dead that they would be judged. In fact, we're going to be resurrecting those dead. But we're going to be in a state to where microorganisms will actually obey us and form that body just like it was when it was new, be without sickness and disease. That's how we're going to resurrect. And you can be a part of that resurrection, brothers and sisters, if you'll come out from among them and not be defiling yourselves, not be practicing sin, adultery, fornication, bestiality, sodomy. That's all the things of the Catholic Church. We can't have a part in that. And it's spread all over everything where the unclean harmonize and do their work in poisoning everybody that comes near it. You should give reward to your servants, the prophets, and to all the saints, to those who reverence your name. Did you get that? I spent, I don't know how many sermons on reverencing the name of Yahweh. If you haven't got them, you need to get them. They're in the book of Yisrael, right? Yes, in the book of Yisrael. Small and great, and should destroy those, or let them destroy themselves, who have defiled the earth. Yes, it is defiled, and we have the top-notch scientists saying this earth is defiled. It's badly defiled. The sidewalks, the parking lots, the inside, the materials you buy, and so forth. Then the house of Yahweh was made open. You know what you're doing right now? We're making open the house of Yahweh. When I scold you, as Yahweh said in the same chapter, for sin, that was a prediction that I would do this. If you'll read this chapter fully, you'll find out that he who continues to sin, this trumpet is going to blow against you. Yahweh says he's going to do this. The house of Yahweh was made open in heaven. Yes, we're for, remember the sea of glass, all this stuff these sermons that I brought on the great sea of glass where Yahweh can see every hair on your head? Yes, he can see the sparrows, even a tiny sparrow that would fall. He knows it. He's aware of it. Nothing gets by him. Everything you do, he's aware of. It's made open. We're making it open right now. We're on the sea of glass right now for all to see. And the ark of Yahweh's covenant was seen in the house, in his house. Yes, he's aware of this. He's aware of this right here. And there was lightnings and voices and thunders and an earthquake and great hail. All of this taking place in this time period. If you go over to Revelations 13, I know we're out of time, but let me get just a couple of scriptures here. Wait a minute. Before you go there, let's go back. Revelations 13:15. We better go on to Revelations 13:15. Now, this is where we ended last week. Revelations 13:15. This is the United States. It's a two-horned beast, Christian and Catholic. They're all the same, but they claim to be different in just a little bit because they protested against the Catholic Church. Well, the Protestants are doing the same thing that the Catholic Church is doing. They're worshiping all the gods. You know, that's what the whole world is doing. They're worshiping gods, or they wouldn't be having wars and fighting. The house of Yahweh is going to put an end to wars and fighting. They're also going to put an end to death. Well, here in verse 15 now, where we ended, he said, and he had power to give life unto the likeness of the beast, that the likeness of the beast should both speak and cause. Notice the cause. They're going to force this. That as many as would not worship the likeness of the beast should be killed. That's what you see taking place, brethren, right now in and around the great river Euphrates. Yahweh shows it would be there first, in and around the great river Euphrates, in that fourth part of the earth. And chapter 9 shows you how many would actually die there. Yes, he's well aware of what is taking place and what is going to take place. And he says after this number is killed in and around the great river Euphrates, then it still won't stop. After that, the sun will be darkened, and the earth is actually going to be burned. Burned in 1 hour. 1 hour's burning. And our scientists say now that is exactly what's going to take place. when we have this nuclear war that we can see we're right on the verge of it. It's building just like Yahweh said it would at this time, at the same time period that this great gathering, Yahweh sees to it that the ears are opened, the ones that He has named from the beginning, yes, preordained, if that's the word you want to use. Go back up to verse 11. Verse 11, he says, I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, not the sea. The first one in verse 1 comes up from the sea. The waters that you saw, according to Revelation 17, is multitudes, nations, and tongues. This one comes up, this one is different. It comes up in a land not yet established. No multitudes, nations, and tongues. This was written in 96 AY. America was not discovered until 1492. It didn't have multitudes, nations, and tongues. So this one rose up, this great beast rose up, verse 11, another beast came up out of the earth where there's no multitudes, nations, and tongues, and he had two horns, Christian, and Catholic. They put Jewish in there. Jewish is nothing more than Christian or Catholic. In fact, they practice the same thing as the Coptic Catholics. They just a little bit different from the mother church that brought them up. Earth had two horns like a lamb. They pretend to be righteous like a lamb, but they're speaking right now as a dragon with fire blowing out of his mouth, burning up their enemies. Like a dragon, spoke as a dragon. And he exercised all the authority of the original Roman Catholic Church, the fourth beast of Daniel. He exercised. He tells you what the United States is doing right here in this chapter, written in 96 AY. After him and caused the earth. He's forcing the earth. He's trying to force this religion, this one world religion over all the earth, and trying to kill all of those who have any form of holiness. That is exactly what was forecast, and that's what's taking place right now. They have millions dying right now of starvation and famine. Yes, as well as getting blown to pieces. The first beast before him, and caused the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. That is, practice, serve. That's what worship means. Deuteronomy 30 is a great example of that. If you turn to the gods and worship them by serving them, it's so in Book 1 and Book 2, service. You serve Satan when you sin, as 1 John 3 shows. Okay, verse 13. 13:13. You see that? 13:13. This is speaking of the United States. That number 13:13 means different, superior, outstanding. In that he makes fire come down from heaven in the sight of man. This one is different. It's superior. It's outstanding. I've told you before, the United States is going to be the strongest nation of all up to the very end. That very end is 1 hour of burning that's going to take place very soon. I think we're pretty close to getting that third part of man over that fourth part of the earth over there. You know, we've killed a bunch of them since this war started. Since the wars started, not the nuclear now, The nuclear was held back, remember? We gave the date when the wars would start. The nuclear was the only thing that was held back by single-handedly by one general. But they did start it. They hit a nuclear plant on that very date, so it started. And verse 13 says, and he does great wonders. Remember, he's superior, he's different, he's outstanding, he's excellent. That's what Strong says. Number 13:13. In that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. Oh, how boastful that must seem. Because every nation on earth now is wanting that kind of God worship in their power, in their great army power, their king's power. Remember when they came to Samuel and said, we don't want Yahweh's leading us anymore? And Yahweh said, give them a king. Give them a king. Well, we'll get to that later. But that's what they wanted. Yahweh led them out before that. In fact, he led them up until the time of David, your scripture says. Until the time of David. And Yahweh said, from now on, you're going to have to fight your own battles. Yahweh led them out. They didn't even have to carry a sword. He led them through the nations. They didn't even have to worry about Yahweh driving the nations out before them. That's what they gave up. The 12 tribes, the stupid 12 tribes, that is as stupid as a quartet today being offered the same thing, but they got this great power that is deceiving them, thinking it's going to bring Russia peace, the EU peace, the UN peace, and the United States peace. And all of them are bickering and fighting, as you just saw on the news. I kept calling Eliyahu this week, calling him, hey, you got to get this, you got to get this, you got to get this. Well, we could have run on for 2 hours of news there this morning and never got it all played. But this is all the same thing. And every nation now, every news nation on the air, it was running this week, showing what this could lead to. And all of them know that this could lead to this nuclear war that will darken the sun. Well, he deceives. Notice that this is deception. There's no way war is going to bring peace. No way retaliation or vengeance is going to bring peace. He deceives, and deceives those who dwell on the earth by those acts of power which he had authority. You get that? Authority. You got to look back to chapter 6, verse 1 to see, and the beginning of chapter 13 there, to see it's Satan that's given this, not Yahweh. He withdrew from them. He said they didn't want to retain Yahweh in their knowledge, in their actions, in their leadership. So he withdrew and gave them over to this reprobate mind, which comes down, Yahweh says in Genesis 49, to every single person living on the face of the earth. Comes down to you. Here is what we face in their blood, in their confused minds, in their bodies, acts of power, which he had authority. He's given authority now to do. Yes, it's the Vatican that's giving the quartet its power, its authority to do this. They call it just war. And just war is to depopulate the earth. Yes, that's just. Let's get rid of about 2/3 of these people so we can possess their land and their wealth. And then we'll start over again. We'll just have one religion. Well, that's the plan. It won't work. It never has. In the sight of the beast. Notice he's given authority to do in the sight of the beast. Under the watchful care, that word sight there, if you just look it up, It's under the management, the watchful care, the teaching, the guiding. And now the Pope is calling for complete unity. And 27 nations, actually there was 28, but one of them decided not to. But he's calling for complete unity. They don't want anyone using their brain. They don't want anyone thinking. They don't want anyone saying, well, this is not going to bring peace. We need to do something else. Or here's a way that will bring peace. They don't want that at all, and the Pope is making that perfectly clear. That is the message coming to these 27 nations from the Vatican. We don't want anyone saying anything. Just put your hope in the Catholic Church. Do exactly what the Vatican tells you to do. Be absolutely 100% in unity and solidarity. Well, of course, this will just lead to this nuclear burning. As you can see, there's no unity among the quartet. They're fighting each other. They're bickering with each other. They're threatening each other. And all of them now are talking first track. First track. Even North Korea, and she's not a member of the quartet. but North Korea could actually lead the quartet into fighting each other. This is what Caspar Weinberger brought out. Them and Iran, he named several, that can do the same thing. This is just a little row, but right now Russia says she's sending a big warship over to where these missiles was shot. She's terribly aggravated that this took place. They think now that they're going to hit Iran. You know, this is the talk. What are they going to do? What's the United States going to do? Well, the talk is they're going to take over all the countries one by one. And they're going to force their religion. It's a religion. The Catholic religion. They're going to force this. You just read it in your own scripture. They're going to force it to be like this first beast. Be like the beast that sits on the 7 hills. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you!